Are you telling stories that are putting you in the passenger seat of your life and business? Listen in as Dr. Michèle Gunderson, known as the Breakthrough Story Expert, shares how to get in the driver's seat of your life as you begin to tell yourself stories that empower and motivate you.
Welcome to this week's episode of Biz Success in 15, where top experts share hot tips and strategies that you can implement in as little as 15 minutes to build your dream business. And now here's your host, the Visibility Whiz, Cindy J.
Hi, I'm Cindy J, the Visibility Whiz, and welcome to this episode of Biz Success in 15. And our guest today is Michèle Gunderson. She's known as the Breakthrough Story Expert and is the founder of Story Freedom. It's a company that helps heart-centered entrepreneurs create empowering stories in every aspect of their business so they can catapult both their business and their lives. Welcome, Michèle. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much, Cindy. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you. And the pleasure's all ours. I'm so excited to be talking about stories. So first of all, Michèle, can you tell us how we can know if we're telling a disempowering story?
Of course, Cindy, and it's a really important question to ask because sometimes we don't even know that we're telling stories at all. We're telling them all day long, all the time. And when we're caught in a disempowering story, it means that we're not getting the results that we want. It means that we're not as connected with others as we want. It means that something is going wrong in our lives, in our companies, in our world. And so it's really important to know if there's a disempowering story going on because it means that our lives aren't going the way we want. So the very first thing that I teach my clients to do when we work more closely together is check in with their body. So if your body will give you clues right away, in moment by moment, if your shoulders are hunched up, if your breathing is funny, if you just don't feel right, if you're like it used to be in my life earlier, and this is always sick. It doesn't mean just because you're sick, I don't mean like blame the victim that you're sick, but something is breaking. What I'm trying to say is the body is giving us signals that something doesn't feel right, that something is wrong, whether it's a momentary thing or something that has just been building for a long while. Our bodies are giving us access to the knowledge that something needs to change. And then the other, so that's number one, check in with your body. Second thing to do is check in with your results. If your life isn't going the way that you want, if you're not getting the results that you want, if you keep on trying but you're not getting there, somewhere there's a disempowering story that's throwing the wrench into the works, and that until that changes, you can have the best systems and structures, you can invest tons of money trying to create the things you want to create. And in my experience and the experience of the thousands of people I've worked with, it just we keep ending up bumping into something. So check in with your body, check in with your results.
I love those two. Now with the body, especially a lot of times when we're telling a story on Facebook Live, via video, on a podcast, or in person. So therefore, a lot of people are really afraid of these things, even being on camera. Some people are afraid. So whenever you're tuning into your body, what's the best way to determine, is this because your story's disempowering, or is this just because you're nervous as hell?
Well, Cindy, the way you're putting it, like is a disempowering story, or am I nervous as hell? Well, that nervousness itself involves, to me, those aren't opposites, involves a disempowering story. I'm nervous because I'm afraid that as I go up there, something's going to go wrong and I'm going to make a fool of myself. I'm not going to say the right thing. I'm creating, our stories create our worlds, and literally they create the world around us. And so I've created what I call, it means I'm living life unconsciously in the genre of tragedy. It's going to start out well, but then it's going to go downhill from there. So those things are the same thing. It means I've got a disempowering story, and when I can take some people. I'm not dissing the what people use to control that. I study how to give a speech. I take anxiety meds. I do whatever it is. But until I unhook that disempowering story, it's like I'm getting at the fruits and I'm not getting to the root of what's actually going on.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is if you're nervous and you're afraid, you're telling yourself a disempowering story, and that disempowering story may not really be the story that you're telling other people, but because you're telling yourself this disempowering story, you're not going to get the results that you would want. If you felt good and you're telling yourself an empowering story, I can do this, I know what I'm speaking about, and let go of those fears and anxiety, then you're going to get better results.
Oh, yeah. Cindy, you mentioned something really important here because you're talking about the story we're telling others and then the story inside us. And that is a crucial point about story that so many entrepreneurs miss. When we hear and understand and implement this piece, it changes everything. The story that's inside me needs to be aligned with the words I'm saying, the story I'm telling the world. If it's not, nobody's going to hear me. And like, some people come up to me and they say, Michèle, how come, why is it that you can meet somebody and the next day they're your $20,000 client? And, it's like people you've heard, facts tell, stories sell. But it's not just about this little story that we're telling in this one moment of a talk or, my bio or my elevator pitch. Stories so much bigger than that. What are the stories inside me that I'm generating, that I don't even know that I'm generating, like that nervousness story, right? What about the craft of the telling stories? And both of those, they need to match. And the more I master both levels of those, the more it makes a profound difference in my impact, in who I'm able to serve, in what my results are in my life. And can I give an example of that? Because sometimes it's like,
Sure.
Oh, what do you mean by that? Yeah. So one of my clients, Sarah, she was, there was a stage she really wanted to get on. It was in front of hundreds of people, and it was competitive to get on that stage. She tried, it was over 3 years. She tried 5 times, and she had the stories to get on the stage. She'd had tremendous results that should have put her on that stage, but she couldn't get there. She couldn't get there. And this is a spot that by competition, you could get there for free. Mm-hmm. But other people would, they paid $20,000 to get that much time on that stage. So she tried 5 times already over 3 years. We just did a little bit of work, tweaking her inner world story and tweaking this story that she was telling the audience. And she immediately got picked up. She got onto that stage. And then she was speaking to the host, and she started saying the old way of doing it and started tapping into what she used to do. And the host just said, "Oh, no, don't say that." And then she started saying the things that we talked about and how to align that. And the host said, yeah, that's going to, that will move the audience, right? So right. Aligning the story and having the craft of the story in the outer world and knowing what's going on in the inner world, that the anxiety that you mentioned, before speaking on stage, for instance, I was just talking to my high-level clients about this recently, and I said, don't worry, it's just using your powerful story-making ability, your powerful imagination to envision a future that you really don't want. Why would we do that, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's sort of what I always say. I said the fears we tell ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves, sometimes the nightmares. I go, they're the only difference between telling yourself what you want and telling yourself what you don't want. If you're telling yourself what you want, that's your dream. If you tell yourself what you don't want, that's a nightmare. And so why do you keep trying to relive this nightmare? It's like, let the nightmare go away.
I love that, Cindy. I was like, live the dream, not the nightmare. But then it's like, well, how do I do that? I've got this momentum. I've got these old stories. I've got, I'm used to being headed in that direction. So I love what you said. It's like, I live the dream, I don't live the nightmare. And then understand how the story helps us. This is for me and the people I work with is like, understand how I'm even crafting the story in ways that I don't even know, that put me in that nightmare accidentally in ways that I'm unconscious of. Right. How can I tap into that, find out what's going on so I can live that dream? I love what you said, dream versus nightmare. Cindy, let's, pick dream, please, right?
Yes. And Michèle, I know we all have our challenges to get to where we are. So would you mind sharing one of the challenges you personally had to overcome to achieve your level of success?
Happy to, Cindy, and it's a great question. And I could talk about a launch that didn't go as well, or a speaking engagement, or I don't know, a client, a challenge with a team. All those things are part of a company, but I think that often what happens is it's what's going on right here, right now in our lives. And I remember a week. It was really the whole week. Almost 4 years ago now, and I got this note from my daughter's school. And, what's going on in our personal lives is so connected with our companies. right? I mean, if our personal life, if something's going wrong, and right now, as we're chatting about this, in the midst of COVID-19, it's like, how do I do the company while I'm trying to take care of the kids at home, and I don't even know if I'm supposed to go out or not, and when I do, I'm scared. And so, like, all this impacts. These are all stories that we're living in, and a reality that we're living in, and then how do we navigate? So I got a note from my daughter's school. She's in grade 11 at the time, and they told us there was a gunman who was threatening to come to their school and use a gun at our school. And so, you know, you can imagine, like, everything in the company kind of falls away for the moment, because I've got to decide, do I let my 17-year-old daughter go to school or not? She wants to go, but I'm not certain they're protecting the kids. They didn't tell us until they let a big gathering happen before they actually even told us. I'm like, I'm not sure I trust what's going on out there. And I mentioned this story because, like, so many people, I think, are in this, you know, I'm afraid of what's out there. Are they telling us everything with COVID-19?
Right.
And what do I do? It's, you know, there's a lot of grief, a lot of fear. And so finally, you know, I'm talking to my man, and he's encouraging me. And finally, like, she knew what she wanted to do, and I let her go. But these things, they pull energy away from our work, right? And so she goes in, and we don't know how it's gonna go, but she was fine in the end. And I got a call the next day, and I see it's from Texas. My man's in Texas, and I say, Shelley, you know, and because I'm sure he's calling, like, is Dana okay? And the other end of the line, I hear this voice that I will never forget. It's like, no, this isn't Shelley. My man's name's Shelley. It's like, no, this isn't Shelley. This is Shelley's mom. Shelley's dead. So my man died nearly 4 years ago. And the thing is, like, we often get blindsided, right? Or we feel like we've been blindsided. All my attention over here on my daughter is I'm watching my daughter walk into the school, not knowing if she's going to be alive. The next day I get the call. He was healthy. He was fine. And then, you know, we're all on purpose when we're giving our gifts. We're on purpose on this planet. I had a retreat to teach 2 days. 2 days later, I need to leave to teach the retreat. So I pick up the phone, and minutes after I've learned my man is dying, and I call my dear friend Sarah, because she's got a PhD in psychology. I'm like, she'll put me back together again. You know, I just, like, all the hundreds of people I could call, like, who do I call? I call my friend Sarah. She says, well, Michèle, clearly you cannot teach the retreat in a couple of days. So she starts helping me undo this retreat, or at least that's what she thought. But the thing is, you know, when I've been working in the field of words and stories over 25 years, and I know that we create our worlds through the stories we tell. Even in that moment, what I said to Sarah is, like, people are flying in from all across the continent. They're counting on me to be there. I'm going to be there. I'm going. And, you know, when you have a powerful story inside you, and that story was so strong, it was so powerful. My man had said, you know, if they're ever selling that property, we're buying. Like, I want to live there for the rest of my life with you. Of course I wanted to be there, to serve my students, to be in that energy. It was a beautiful property, beautiful space. So when we have a powerful story that is completely focused in one direction, it moves mountains. Because Sarah went from, okay, you know, you're not doing that. And she wasn't the one in the middle of, you know, all this, right? She had the clear and level head. But the moment that I said that, there was such strength and such conviction. She's like, there was just a small pause. She said, okay, Michèle, how do we make that happen? And the world started moving in that direction. And so I mentioned that story because I think a lot of people right now are, you know, feeling blindsided, feeling like that, you know, this came up in ways that I don't expect and that I don't understand and I don't know what to do. And I thought the challenge was going to be over here, and instead it's over here. And when you have like stories, what they're made up of is there's a desire, there's something that we really, really want, and there's something in the way. And a lot of people, we end up living, like I said, unconsciously in the genre of tragedy. And I give this example because that of all times is like, well, yes, this is tragic. I mean, was I heartbroken? Of course. That could have been my full story. But to me, it's like, turn the page. The story continues. We're in multiple stories at once. I was also in the story of myself as a mentor, as teacher. And that's where I put my attention. That became my focused, that became my entire focus. And that brought life. I mean, we laughed, we cried. I knew it was going to be the best retreat I ever taught to date. And it was. I mean, the things that happened there because of the energy of that time. And so if, you know, you're listening to us here, You're feeling like things are gone in a direction that you didn't want or you didn't know was going to happen. There's something there that when you can tap into the power of story to gain focus, to gain the power of, what's that object of desire? And then can I see what the obstacle is? The stories will tell us how to get there. And we love stories because Harry Potter or from J.K. Rowling to Shakespeare, like there's these heroes that seem larger than life. And they manage to get through.
Right.
We want to understand why and how that happens. And if we could tap into even a little bit of that in our lives. And so that was a hard week.
I love that story, and I just couldn't even imagine. But then, I do know that there was a period of time in my life where I was really depressed and suicidal. And then my daughter got into trouble. She was 14 at the time. She had ripped off a store with $500 worth of clothes, 14-year-old, but I had to put my focus on her. And so whenever you're talking about like the stories, even with that, I was in my own story of how terrible my life was. But then because of my love for my daughter, I put my focus on her instead of my own miserable grief. And that's sort of what you did. You still, I'm sure you allowed yourself time to grieve in the right time, but your love for your students and your love for your community sort of helped you over that shock period. I couldn't imagine doing that whenever somebody close to me died. I've had several people close to me die. And so I really hand it to you, but I love the way you said, it's all about the stories that you choose to focus on. So instead of focusing on Shelley, you chose for a few days to focus on your clients and the people who counted on you, and then you allowed yourself time to grieve.
See, and also what that allowed me access to was, his energy of joy and community, and he had a crazy sense of humor, and all these wacky things that came up at the retreat were just like, you can't make this stuff up, you can't make this stuff up. And so it was beautiful as well. And the things, the obstacles that we bump into in our companies, in our lives, sometimes it's something writ large, like COVID-19, and all of a sudden I need to be home, or loved ones are dying, or I'm afraid, or whatever it is, or I'm all alone, or I homeschool my kids, or and sometimes it's the obstacles come in the form of something seemingly trivial, like I spill my cup of coffee in the morning and then I'm having one of those days, and living life unconsciously is like tragedy because I'm going, oh, it started out from there and then it went downhill. And so it doesn't matter the size of the obstacle. Can I understand the way story structure works? And can I understand the way that I'm creating it in ways that are unconscious and conscious, bring more of it to consciousness, so I gain control, not of the elements of the story. That's really important. I'm not in charge of whether what the laws are saying about if I go outside right now or not. I'm not in charge of a loved one dying or not. I'm not in charge of those things. But I can be in the driver's seat of my own story. And so many people end up in the passenger seat. There's somebody else like playing a bit part in somebody else's story. Or we unconsciously are picking up stories from the air that we don't even know we're picking up. And so something like COVID-19, for instance, it could be like the worst thing that happened, and therefore it's going to make my company shut down. And if I believe that, that's what happens. Or it could be for a company, it could be the most creative time, the most revolutionary time, the time when all that idea that I've been afraid to implement, but now, hey, might as well do it now. Is it a challenge, or is it an opportunity?
Right. And going with that, I love my son's story. He was on one of those fake waves, the fake surfboards, and he got knocked off of it, hit his head on the wall, and it broke his neck. So he did some surgeries, and he's had a 100% recovery, right? Like probably about 2 weeks after he broke his neck, and I had him home in Phoenix, his boss called him and fired him. He knew he couldn't work because he couldn't physically work, but he asked his doctor, he said, is it okay if I start a business as long as I don't actually do labor in it?
Like, who does that? You know, at that kind of time, it's like, this has just happened. Oh, let me start a business. Talk about an empowering story.
And the doctors were like, yeah, as long as you're not out there doing heavy labor, you can network with people and talk with people. So the 9 months that it took him to recuperate, he built his business. He networked with people. He, he went to the attorney, got everything figured out for his business. He got his LLC. He did all this stuff while he was recovering with his broken neck. And whenever he was released to go back to work, he immediately started getting clients, and he made over 6 figures in the first 6 months of his business, actually opening, because he did all this pre-work when he couldn't. And I love his story, especially now whenever so many people think COVID-19 is horrible. But whenever you switch your story around like my son did, you can create something really beautiful out of it.
Yeah, so beautiful. I love those 9 months too. He birthed a business in 9 months, and that there's, you know, possibility there. There's possibility and outside the box thinking that is available. And, you know, it's funny though, what becomes an empowering story and what doesn't. A lot of people recently have been talking about pivoting, and, you know, at first that seemed like a really great thing to do. And I was talking to somebody just a couple of days ago, and you know, you could say that your son successfully and beautifully pivoted from what he was doing before. So it's not new to COVID-19 in the first off. And then secondly, you know, I was talking to somebody a couple of days ago, and she was like, I'm tired of hearing about pivoting, because everybody's talking about pivoting now, and that itself even can start to become a disempowering story. It all depends on, like, what are the stories out there that I'm picking up that I don't even know about, and what is the right path for me, and how can I, in this sea of stories that are out there about what I'm supposed to do, what I'm not supposed to do, what's the right thing to do, and what will you know, make the best, highest impact. I mean, to find that empowering story for me is a very for each person, it's a very individual thing, because we could just say, well, you know, everyone should pivot. Well, maybe some should, maybe some shouldn't, right? Maybe what you're doing, just do more of that. And so finding that unique story path for each person is so crucial for that success that we crave.
I haven't been on the quote unquote pivot bandwagon. You know, I'm like, regardless, to me, whenever you have a business, you constantly have to shift your mindset based on your clients, based on the results you're getting, based on what's happening in the world. And it's interesting to me that this word came up like as something new or something that everybody's per se doing it. Whenever anything, like I had mentioned, we had a large earthquake in my town last year. So naturally things had to change, or even in my business, when my son broke his neck, things changed. When Shelley died, your business changed. You know, we always have change, but for some reason, because it's global, everybody has said, oh, it's time to pivot. And it's like, some people have to and some people don't. It all depends upon the mindsets of your clients and where you are.
Yeah. What's the thing that I want? And can I clear out, if I'm not even aware of all these other stories, I'm just going to pick them up accidentally without knowing I've picked it up. You know, everybody is doing whatever it is. Everybody is or isn't on Facebook, or everybody is or isn't using LinkedIn, or everybody is or isn't whatever it is they're doing, hiring this kind of person for their team. So, you know, and we jump on bandwagons without even knowing that we're doing it. And instead, can I know what I really truly want in my quiet moments? Can I tap in and see what my desire is for my company, my own unique footprint on this planet, and make choices from that place. And like you say, changes, you know, we're always in a world that is evolving. So against that backdrop, what is it that is the most important to me? And that story, is always pivoting and changing.
Yeah, and I could talk to you, so I can't believe how long we've been talking. It's so interesting talking about stories. But real quick, I know, because this just intrigues me, how does a well-told story change the chemistry of your listener's brain?
Yes. Great question. So first, I want to say that it does change the chemistry of the listener's brain, and it moves them to action. And so as I said, I've been in the field of stories for over 2 decades. So this is not new to me. I've watched this in action, but a wonderful neuroeconomist named Dr. Paul Ozak, he's one of the leaders studying how this has happened. So it changes when we tell a well-told story, and there's a dramatic arc. There's rising action, there's tension, there's it starts out with something shifting. There's all these classic designs of story. When a story is told in that way, then changes levels of cortisol, oxytocin in the brain, and actually moves people to action. So he studied two groups and had them watch a film about a real story about a father and a son. The son had cancer, and in one version, people donated generously to that cause, and they didn't have to, they didn't need to, and they had like pins poked in them, and it took them an hour of their time, and they donated. And the story was told in a particular way. Then they have the story, without all of those important features of the story, and they didn't come to the highest in them. They didn't donate. They didn't take action. And so story form, it's eons old. It changes our brains. It moves people to action. And we're, as entrepreneurs, we're helping people to take action. We're helping people to create change. And so understanding how to harness the power of story in order to move people, whether it's our talks, in sales calls, in our marketing copy, when we're wanting to move our team, or even talking to our kids or our relatives about why we're doing what it is we're doing instead of going to the park with them, or maybe why we're telling ourselves why we're going to the park in this moment instead of working. All that is story. It inspires others, it inspires us. It actually literally changes our brains.
I love that. Thank you. And next, can you share a business strategy that our listeners can implement in 15 minutes or less to build their business?
Absolutely. So this is what I share with when people work more closely with me. One of the first things that I ask them to do. Now, part of my background that not everyone knows, I'm also an Iyengar yoga teacher. And so, because from my I used to teach university. My PhD is in story, the stories that bind us, the stories that set us free. That's what I studied. That's what I wanted to know. But from my background, both with my PhD and as an Iyengar yoga teacher, I know our stories are embedded right in our bodies. And so we want to unplug these disempowering stories, make space for a different kind of a story, and unplug from other people's stories. I ask all of my high-level clients to start their day in Shavasana. Super easy. It could take less than 15 minutes. Roll out of bed, lie on the floor, and breathe. And I've been given, hundreds of different kinds of techniques from all the best teachers on the planet. And if I did them all, it would take me from morning till night, right? And the night as well. But this one practice, I've practiced daily since summer of 2006 and only missed a handful of days. It's crucial because I get a chance to unplug those old stories and create a space for something new. So that could take 5 minutes. And then with the rest of your time, start noticing when your body is tense, start noticing when there's that disempowering story and start journaling about it. And this is so important. I could give tactics. I could give, how to craft your talk. I could give all that kind of stuff. But Jack Canfield says 1 hour of work in the inner world is equal to 7 hours of work in the outer world. Are you working too hard? So if you're working hard in your business and you're not getting the results that you want, somewhere there's a disempowering story. Spending even a few minutes in the inner world, people might think, I don't have those 5 minutes. Well, I can't afford not to, right? If I get 7 times the, if it gives me that kind of impact. So roll out of bed, lie there and breathe for a few minute. Have a journal nearby and notice those moments of tension and know that there's a disempowering story somewhere there. And then be with people who can help you. And the more you know about story, the more it can help, who can help you untangle what's the story that's getting in the way, what's the empowering story that I can create so that I can actually get to where I want to go, and so much faster.
Right. That's a great strategy. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder too. The inner world is so important. Sometimes that's always what people let go of first, whenever it should be something you never let go of. And I know that you have a wonderful gift for us. So can you share what it is?
Absolutely. So it's called Anatomy of an Empowering Story. And so what it's going to do in more detail than we have time to go into here, it helps you understand, what are the stories that lead to chaos and what are the stories that lead to success? What does every story need in order for it to land, in order for it to make a difference? More about like how stories change the listener's brain, and also how do we use stories in multiple different areas of our companies to get the results that we want? And how do I start to create an empowering story of my own? What's the biggest mistake most entrepreneurs make about story, and what to do about it to change it? So it's called Anatomy of an Empowering Story. And I had a disempowering story myself. I thought, I can't share this in just like 15 pages. Like, people won't get it. We need a deep dive. But I took the time. I wrote down, and I'm like, no, people will get this. People are smart. People will understand. And in just 20 minutes is one thing you could do too, just like once off, 20 minutes to read this and find out how to harness that power of story in your company and your life.
Thank you. And what you want to our listeners, you want to head on over to bizsuccessin15.com/story, all lowercase, STORY. So Biz Success, Biz is BIZ, Success, NIN, the number 15.com/story, and grab your own copy of The Anatomy of an Empowering Story. You'll be glad that you did. And Michèle, do you have any parting words for us?
Your story is your own. Your story creates your life. Your story creates your company. You can change the trajectory of your life, and therefore you can change the world. Tap into that power. It's your birthright.
I love that. Thank you very much. And thank you for being our guest today. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. The pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for having me here, Cindy.
You're very, very welcome. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, feel free to share it with your friends. You'll want to hop on over to bizsuccessin15.com/story, where you'll find all links from today's show. You'll be able to re-listen to Michèle's words of wisdom and catch up on past episodes. While you're there, be sure to grab Michèle's gift to you, The Anatomy of an Empowering Story. Big hugs, and be sure to tune in to Biz Success in 15 next week with another amazing guest. Bye.
You've been listening to Biz Success in 15. For all links mentioned in today's show and to watch or listen to previous episodes, visit bizsuccessin15.com. Thanks so much for listening, and be sure to tune in next week for another amazing guest.